Hello guys, and welcome back to this new video. So today we are going to talk about the sarcophagy. But before you leave me, not that way. I discovered something and I wanted to share, because when I discover, I'll share. And specifically, we are going to talk something interesting, traumatizing, intriguing. I don't know, I still am absorbing this. Okay, so let's start. Sarcophagi. Yes, they were used throughout late antiquity. We know sarcophagi from Babylonia, from ancient Egypt, and from ancient Rome. Definitely the Egyptian sarcophagi were fabulous, made of gold and like beautiful colors, painted, amazing. But also the ancient Roman sarcophagi were quite nice, made of marble usually. So what is it that I'm talking about? So point number one, we know sarcophagi were used. We also know what was the normal traditional procedure, if you want to call it like that. Meaning what? Meaning what the Romans would call collocatio. So you had the body, you placed the body in the sarcophagus, and then, well, the body was clothed, and there was a lot of jewelry on the body, right? So for instance, for women, you have women that are buried with a lot of jewelry, a lot of golden jewelry, especially earrings, necklaces, rings, bracelets, everything. Also, jewelry made mostly of gold, sometimes gold and sapphires, for instance, right? It depended on the rank of nobility that person belonged to. Also, something that, you know, it's completely outside of the purpose of this video is the lay down with real garlands, right? And that made me think that this tradition that we have to place flowers on top of the coffin, or to bring flowers to the dead, actually might be traced back to ancient Romans, and that I thought was interesting, enlightening, and also I don't really know why why we do that, or if that has its roots in ancient Rome or even earlier in time. But again, none of this is what we're going to talk about. What we are going to talk about today is reusing a sarcophagi. Okay, so there's one thing that the sources claim to be repurposing sarcophagi. Okay, how do you repurpose a sarcophagi? Okay, you change the purpose, the function of that sarcophagus. So what happens is that the sarcophagus stops being a sarcophagus and becomes holy water baptismal font. That also works for altars, that also worked for cinerary urns, right? They became baptismal fonts. Okay, that's, you know, interesting. But not really, because if you go enough around churches, and if you visit like churches that deeply, you'll find, especially I believe in Rome, you'll find a bunch of churches that have repurposed sarcophagi or cinerary urns. So far, nothing special. But there's something that is called repurposing, and there's something that was a well-established habit around the second, I think more 3rd century AD, and that habit was to steal, desecrating the coffin, the sarcophagus. So experts, the archaeologists especially, say that two are the reasons. Number one, decline of economy. Number 2, scarcity of material. Material in question would be marble. So they would reuse or steal, plunder tombs in order to get some marble revestments and then reuse them for other reasons. This was so common that there is something called sepulchris violatis. This is a Latin expression, and it's like basically a felony. It's a crime, and it established that you cannot violate the place of burial. Laws regarding the sepulchris violatis are contained in Codex Theodosianus and Codex Justinianus, among many others. Those 2 are the most important ones. Plus, I want to say, there was a council known as 585th Council of Macon that established that, yes, you could not reuse any material from any tomb if that implied violating that tomb, that sarcophagus, before the composition. Did you get that? Like before the composition. So they were even waiting that long. Okay. Alright, so this is the idea. So you had a sarcophagus, right? And then you could reuse that sarcophagus for different reasons, but mostly either because you wanted marble, and so you kind of like whatever, you kind of like picked a piece of marble from that tomb and reused that, or this is what we're gonna deal today, is you picked the entire sarcophagus, eliminated the remains of the body from the sarcophagus, and then just redeployed the same sarcophagus for somebody else. Let me just recap there. So you had collocatio, what the Romans were doing, which is laying down the body, which we saw, we discussed that, right? And then if the sarcophagus, for instance, was big enough, you had a slit, and the slit was to place something like a barrier, because your spouse could be buried next to you. So that meant already that those sarcophagi could be open to place the corpse of the spouse next to the other one. Now, we understand that when you do that, the smell cannot be that bad because the sarcophagus has like entrapped all the smell. Plus, we know, I mean, there were somewhat smelly because you were doing the collocatio, but before doing the collocatio, the body was like 7 days exposed for the public. I mean, in a private house, but still exposed. But then what they would do is generally to place, I mean for the first body, in case you could place 2, generally what you could do is place something, some sort of material, white material, that would accelerate the composition. So by the time you reopened the sarcophagus, you only have some remains. That's it, right? So the smell wasn't so bad apparently, and you could replace the second body. That is, if you could, if the sarcophagus was big enough, if you wanted to be buried with your wife, if your wife or your husband was not in exile, etc. So, given certain conditions, you can find a couple that has been buried together. And it's not like in the tradition that the husband dies and the women have to throw themselves into the pyre. So the sarcophagus could be reopened. Now that was considered acceptable. Now what happened, so this is like a step further in the process, what happened is that they thought, okay, hold on, so why not reusing that sarcophagus or that sarcophagus for another dead person? So you would wait, or maybe not so much, considering that we have sepulchris violatis that say do not open the sarcophagus before the composition. You would wait a certain amount of time and then think, okay, this other person, noble person, has died, so we can just reopen the sarcophagus, throw away, I am assuming here, because where do you place the remains? Throw away the remains, or you leave them together. I don't know if that is possible, like, I don't know. But anyway, throw away those allegedly, perhaps, right? And then place the new body in the sarcophagus. Question: does anybody find this creepy and weird and slightly tragic, but also very intriguing? Because I still have to make my mind up on how I feel. But anyway, okay, so that was tradition, okay? Apparently, it was more disturbing for pagans than for Christians. Remember, this is like 2nd, 3rd century AD. So it became very important to preserve the body in order to enter heaven, according to Christianity. So that was disturbing for pagans, but not for Christians, which I kind of found weird, because it's like, well, I mean, shouldn't the body be protected and preserved and whatnot? Like, I mean, I understand you place it in a sarcophagus, but then you throw away the remains. Where do you place the remains? Question mark. I don't know. Anyway, so there's that is going on. And then there was a whole nother question, that is emperors. Okay, so emperors, I mean, the first 7 kings of Rome, they were buried. And then from that point onwards, the tradition, the well-established tradition for emperors was to be cremated. Up until pretty much Christian emperors, right? So, for instance, when the capital of the ancient empire, Roman Empire, was Byzantium, you would have emperors sent to Byzantium, living in Byzantium, and also being buried, okay? Because for Christianity it was very important to preserve the body, so being buried. Pay attention, Orthodox Church didn't so much like emperors being buried in the church. So the tradition was first to be buried underneath, like underneath the floor, then to be buried so that the surface of the tomb of the sarcophagus was like visible in part of the floor, and then to be buried outside the church. And I think that's how you get cemeteries anyway. So there's that. But from that point, we extract a piece of information. The tomb was in porphyry, and apparently porphyry was in general the material for emperor, meaning you were an emperor, you wanted something in porphyry, whether that was sarcophagus, whether that was proper coffin. Anyway, sarcophagus made of porphyry. One of the main theories, one of the most interesting one, most definitely, is this one. Ready? Okay. That emperors before the 3rd century, so we're talking about 2nd, but we're also talking about 1st century AD, were actually buried in porphyry-made sarcophagi. I thought that was like exceptional. Okay, so you had an emperor being buried, probably because there was like a trend, a renewal of a trend to be buried rather than cremated, right? And the idea is that that same sarcophagus could have been reused by someone else. So if we nowadays find a sarcophagus that has different remains made in porphyry, we could definitely say, you know, that was that of an emperor, right? But there are some evidence that lead to that conclusion. We can't be sure that the remains we find in that sarcophagus are those of an emperor, because sarcophagi were constantly reused. We cannot be certain that emperors like Adrian were actually cremated. Some archaeologists think that they were not cremated, they were actually buried, and that their sarcophagus was reused. And then reusing sarcophagi and reusing plundering tombs and reusing material from that tomb might have misled us into thinking that they were actually cremated. So there's a good chance that they were buried. I don't know how I feel about it. Okay. Now, last piece of information. Sometimes, pay attention here, sometimes the sarcophagus, the same one, meaning, was reused in order to establish individual association. It is the case of Helena, mother of Constantine, and apparently her sarcophagus was reused by Pope Anastasius IV so that he could be directly linked to the foundation of Christianity. That's it. That's all I got for you today, guys. So, I hope you have enjoyed the video. I still have to absorb all this and understand how I feel about it, because as I said, I'm intrigued. I find this creepy, possibly giving me nightmares. I don't really know, but comment below, let me know. We'll talk some more next time. If you have enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe, like the video, comment below, and hit the notification bell. I hope that was clear. Anyway, unbelievable. Okay, that's it. We'll talk next time. Bye, guys. I'm still pretty much in shock. Anyway.